The night had no mercy. Wind tore across the plains like it was searching for something to destroy, carrying dust, cold, and the kind of silence that made a person feel smaller with every passing second. The road that led to the old Carter Ranch had long been forgotten, worn down by time and grief rather than footsteps. No one came here anymore. No one had a reason to. Except tonight, someone did. Sarah Whitmore stumbled forward through the darkness, her breath uneven, her steps weak but desperate. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hands raw from the cold, her eyes wide with something deeper than fear. Loss. It had been 3 months since they buried her husband, 3 months since the world stopped making sense, 3 months of silence in a house that used to be filled with laughter, arguments, life. Now it was just walls and memories that refused to fade. She hadn't planned to leave that night, hadn't planned anything at all, but the quiet had grown too loud, the emptiness too heavy, and the feeling inside her chest, the one that refused to go away, had finally pushed her out into the cold with no destination, no plan, just the need to escape something she couldn't name. Her foot caught against a rock, and she stumbled forward, barely catching herself before hitting the ground. A sharp breath escaped her lips as she steadied herself, her body trembling. "Keep going," she whispered to herself, though she didn't know where she was going anymore. The wind answered her with another harsh gust. Then, light, faint, flickering in the distance. Sarah froze, her eyes narrowing as she focused. There, just beyond the ridge, a cabin, a real one, not abandoned, not broken, alive. She didn't think, didn't question. She moved. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she kept going, drawn toward that small, fragile glow, like it was the only thing left in the world that mattered. By the time she reached the door, her strength was nearly gone. Her hand lifted slowly, hesitating only for a second before knocking. Once. Twice. The sound barely carried over the wind. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened. Warm light spilled out into the cold night, blinding her for a brief second. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by the flicker of candlelight behind him. His eyes moved quickly, taking in everything. Her condition, her trembling hands, the desperation she couldn't hide even if she tried. "You're freezing," he said. His voice was low, steady, grounded. Sarah tried to speak, but her voice caught. Her body swayed slightly, her strength finally giving out. The man moved instantly, stepping forward and catching her before she could fall. His grip was firm, careful, not rough, not hesitant, just certain. "Easy," he said quietly, pulling her inside. The door shut behind them, cutting off the storm like it had never existed. Inside, the cabin was warm, small, simple, lit by candles that cast soft light across wooden walls. The sudden change hit her all at once. Heat, safety, stillness. Sarah's knees nearly gave out again, but he didn't let her fall. He guided her toward a chair near the fire, his movements controlled, efficient. "Sit," he said. She did, not because she wanted to, but because she had no strength left to argue. He moved quickly, grabbing a blanket and draping it around her shoulders. The warmth wrapped around her instantly, but her body still trembled, as if it didn't trust the safety yet. "What were you doing out there?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Her hands clutched the blanket tightly, her eyes fixed on the fire like she was afraid to look anywhere else. "I couldn't stay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The man watched her, his expression unreadable. "Stay where?" he asked. She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "There," she said, "in that house, with nothing but silence." Something in her voice shifted at the last word. Something fragile, something close to breaking. The man didn't interrupt, didn't rush her. He simply waited. "It's too quiet," she continued, her breathing uneven. "Too empty. I thought I could handle it, But I can't. Her grip on the blanket tightened further, her knuckles turning pale. I needed, she stopped, her voice catching. The words didn't want to come out, or maybe she didn't know how to say them. The man stepped closer, not too close, just enough to be there without overwhelming her. You needed what? He asked softly. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief second, as if gathering what little strength she had left. Then she looked up at him, and when she spoke, her voice carried something raw, something honest. Don't stop, she whispered. The words surprised even her, but once they were out, she couldn't take them back. His brow furrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in focus. Don't stop what? He asked. She shook her head, her breath trembling. This, she said, the warmth, the feeling of not being alone. The room fell quiet. The candles flickered softly, the fire crackled low, and something shifted in the space between them. The man studied her for a long moment. Then slowly he pulled a chair closer and sat across from her. Not touching, not crowding, just present. I'm not going anywhere, he said. His voice was calm, steady, certain, and somehow that mattered more than anything else he could have done. Sarah's shoulders dropped slightly, tension she didn't realize she was holding beginning to loosen. Her breathing steadied, her grip on the blanket easing just a little. Why? She asked. Why help me? The man leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. Because you knocked, he said. Simple, direct, real. Sarah stared at him, searching for something else, for doubt, for hesitation, but she didn't find it. Only truth. And for the first time in months, that was enough. The fire burned steadily between them, the storm outside fading into the background as something else took its place inside the cabin. Not love, not yet, but something just as important, understanding. And for the first time since she lost everything, Sarah didn't feel like she was falling apart alone. The quiet inside the cabin settled around them, but it wasn't the same kind of silence she had run from. This silence felt different, steady, grounded, almost protective. The fire burned low, but constant, the candles flickering softly as if they, too, understood the fragility of the moment. Sarah's breathing slowly evened out, though the ache inside her chest hadn't disappeared. It had simply softened, enough to let her think again, enough to let her feel something other than loss. The man sat across from her, his presence unchanged, solid, calm, patient. He didn't push her to speak, didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. He simply stayed, and somehow that mattered more than anything else. Sarah shifted slightly in her seat, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders as she glanced toward him. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. He looked up from the fire, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Caleb," he said. The name carried weight, simple, but grounded in something real. "Sarah," she replied, though she had already said it without realizing earlier. He nodded once, as if committing it to memory. Another pause settled between them, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like something building, slowly, carefully. "You live out here alone?" she asked after a moment. Caleb leaned back slightly, his eyes drifting briefly toward the walls of the cabin before returning to her. "Yeah. Doesn't it get quiet?" she pressed, her voice softer now. A faint shift crossed his expression, something almost like understanding. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not the kind that eats at you." Sarah looked down at her hands, her fingers tightening slightly in the blanket. "That's the kind I had," she said. "The kind that doesn't just sit there. It presses in, makes it hard to breathe." Caleb didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened. "I thought if I left, even for a little while, it would stop," she continued. "But it followed me anyway." Her voice cracked slightly at the last word, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed by the weakness she couldn't hide. Caleb shifted forward just a little, his tone steady but softer now. "Some things don't stay behind just because you walk away," he said. She nodded faintly, though it didn't make it easier. "Then how do you get away from it?" she asked. He held her gaze for a moment, considering. "You don't," he said finally. "You learn how to carry it without letting it break you." The honesty in his answers settled deep. Sarah stared at him, searching his face for something, anything that might tell her he was just saying what she wanted to hear. But there was nothing like that there. Only truth, and something else, understanding. "You've lost someone too," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Caleb didn't respond right away. His eyes drifted back to the fire, the light reflecting faintly in them. "A long time ago," he said. That was all, but it was enough. Sarah didn't push further. She understood the weight of words left unsaid. Another silence followed, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was shared, and that made all the difference. The storm outside had almost completely faded now, leaving behind a stillness that felt calmer than before. Inside, the warmth of the cabin wrapped around them, steady and real. Sarah shifted again, this time leaning back slightly in her chair, her body finally beginning to relax. The exhaustion she had been fighting for hours started to settle in, pulling at her slowly. "You can rest," Caleb said, noticing the change. She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward him. "What if I wake up and this is gone?" she asked softly. The vulnerability in her voice was impossible to miss. Caleb didn't look away. "It won't be," he said. Simple, certain. Sarah held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. Trust didn't come easily, not anymore. But for the first time in a long while, she wanted to try. She stood carefully, her legs still a little unsteady, and moved toward the small bed in the corner of the cabin. It wasn't much, just a simple frame, a thin mattress, and a worn blanket. But it looked warmer than anything she had known in days. She paused for a second, then looked back at him. "Where will you sleep?" she asked. Caleb gestured faintly toward the chair he had been sitting in. "I'll manage." She frowned slightly. "That's not right." He shrugged lightly. "It's fine." Sarah hesitated, then spoke again, her voice quieter but firmer this time. "You don't have to keep your distance like that." Caleb stilled slightly, her words settling between them. She took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm not asking for anything I'm not ready for," she added, "but I don't want to feel like I'm a stranger you have to stay away from either." The honesty in her voice left no room for misunderstanding. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded once. "All right." It wasn't agreement to anything more than what she had said, but it was enough. Sarah gave a small nod in return before sitting down on the edge of the bed, pulling the blanket around herself. The warmth settled over her quickly, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion she had been holding back. For a moment, she just sat there, watching the fire, listening to the quiet presence behind her. Then slowly, she lay back, her eyes growing heavy. "Caleb," she murmured softly. "Yeah? Thank you for not letting me disappear tonight." He didn't answer right away, but after a moment his voice came, low and steady. "You didn't disappear," he said. "You found your way here." Something about that settled deep within her, easing the last bit of tension she carried. Her eyes closed, her breathing evening out as sleep finally took her. Caleb remained where he was, his gaze shifting between the fire and the woman now resting in his cabin. He didn't move closer, didn't disturb the quiet. He just stayed. The night passed slowly, peacefully, and when morning finally came, it didn't bring the same emptiness it once had. It brought light. Warm, soft light that filled the cabin and touched everything inside it. Sarah stirred gently, her eyes opening as she adjusted to the unfamiliar calm. For a brief second, confusion flickered across her face. Then she remembered. The storm, the cabin, him. She sat up slowly, her gaze immediately finding Caleb near the door, adjusting his coat. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice still soft with sleep. He looked back at her, pausing for a moment. "I've got things to tend to," he said. Something in her chest tightened at the words, though she didn't fully understand why. She stood, wrapping the blanket around herself as she took a step toward him. "Will I see you again?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Caleb studied her, his expression calm but thoughtful. Then, after a brief moment, he nodded. "Yeah," he said, "you will." The answer was simple, but it carried something real. Sarah nodded slowly, a small, genuine smile forming for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Good," she said. Caleb opened the door, the cold morning air slipping inside for a brief moment before he stepped out. But this time, it didn't feel as harsh. It didn't feel as empty. Because as Sarah stood there, watching him ride off into the distance, she realized something had changed. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. Enough to breathe again. Enough to keep going. And for the first time since she lost everything, she had something to hold on to. Not the past, not the pain, but the quiet promise that she wasn't alone anymore.